This conference will now be recorded.
So does anyone know any good jokes?
Go ahead.
Oh gosh. No, I did see an email earlier today about the Gandalf application from Bob. He's added AIS tracking feature. That's pretty exciting.
Officially logged in.
Yeah, yeah, that is.
Um,
That's a,
all right. Well, actually, I don't even know how much more we had to discuss, to be honest. But I think we're gonna.
all right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And my name's Bill Lynch, the UG2 coordinator. And you can see um, a big part of putting all this together in the group that runs this is Kathleen Bailey from NOAA IUS, Nick Rome, Crudy Desai, and Cassie Wilson from Consortium of Ocean Leadership. So we all thank you for attending our 9th webinar. Pretty excited. As you can see, we have some great technical talks. We'll get into the introductions a little bit later. I'm just going to start off with a couple of formalities and just UG2 administrative updates. Next slide, please. Again, yeah, so here's our time frame. And just a reminder, everybody, with the steering committee is still meeting regularly. We usually meet a week after the webinars and address any issues and continue to develop UG2 as a whole. Next slide. So just some quick updates. The membership has actually grown. We have 250 members, and as folks know, when they join, they're asked whether or not they like to be part of the Slack workspace. And as you can see, most people who join do. And that's really become a great collaboration tool. If when you log into it, you can see some of the great collaboration, questions, answers, solutions, problems that pop up. And so that's really been a success. And so for folks, if you have colleagues that want to join, please also have them join the Slack workspace, which is a separate question. And then the steering committee sub focus groups continue to stand up. This will be well integrated into the workshop. We'll have the different focus areas built into the workshop, and then take the outcomes of the workshop, assimilate that, and share it with the UG2 group moving forward. One big just sort of change here in the leads is Hank Stachowicz, who spoke at our last webinar on Alaska operations, and he's on right now. He'll be replacing Travis Miles as he tries to take a couple things off his plate, as things are going to be very busy over the next year. I don't know, Hank, you're out there if you want to say hello or not.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm actually at Rutgers today, and Travis and I just had a nice long discussion about the handoff here.
Cool, great. Thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you at the workshop. Okay, next slide, please. And so this slide really, go to the next slide first, Crudy, and we'll hop back here. So we have the glider workshop coming up. Pretty excited about that. So the goal is to share research, operations, and develop accomplishments across the community. We're having very good responses to this. It will be at the University of Washington in Seattle, for those who didn't know. It's a great venue there at the Botanic Gardens. And it's September 20th through the 22nd right now, scheduled for 2.5 days. We have opened up the abstracts. Originally, the end of May was the drop dead. We extended that to the end of June, which is a week from now. So folks that know of anybody or you're planning on, please get those abstracts in. This will be an in-person only event. So hopefully that keeps up. And we cross our fingers on that. And like I said, it's a great venue. It's an open venue. We'll be able to open up it'll be an open air type of environment as long as the weather's good. Please pass on any colleagues of yours that may not know about this yet. And I don't know, Nick, do you have any other comments on the workshop itself?
Find my mute button. No, Bill, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nick. And you can see the flyer, and we'll start pushing this out pretty heavily. So please join. So if you back up to the previous slide, Crudy. So two things. One is if you have colleagues that have not joined UG2, but if you want to submit to the workshop, it's on the website on the front page down there at upcoming workshops. You click on that and you can go right into the registration and submit abstracts. So it's all right there on the front page. Any questions on anything on the admin side right now before we go into the technical presentations? Okay, we'll go. So we have two great talks coming up. As most people that have participated, we have, Barb just put out a very good note in the chat. Registration is free. There'll be industry sponsors paying, but registration itself is free to the workshop. So again, we have two great topics. In the previous workshops, we've done quite a bit on glider ops, as far as in the Atlantic and the Pacific. Last 2 months ago is with Hank up in Alaska. We've done Northern Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean. And so I'm pretty excited that we're getting an opportunity to see what's going on in the Great Lakes. Our first speaker here is Maggie Xenopoulos. Maggie's a tier 1. She'll be talking on hypoxia turnovers and primary production. Maggie's a tier 1 Canada research chair in global change of freshwater ecosystems at Trent University, where she has been a faculty member for 18 years. Maggie's an ecosystem ecologist whose research expertise centers on understanding freshwater ecosystems at both the local and global scales. She's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Geophysical Research, Biogeosciences, and has received several awards, including University Faculty Award from Canada's Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, an Early Research Award from the province of Ontario, and is a sustaining fellow for the Association of Science of Limnology and Oceanography. And she shared the Zaid Prize for the Environment for Involvement in the United Nations Millennium Assessment. So that's great. Maggie, I'm going to turn the talk over to you and look forward to hearing from you. And just and I'll introduce Nicolai later, but for questions, please enter your questions into the chat and queue them up, and we'll save them for the end of Maggie's talk. All right, Maggie, please.
All right, I should unmute myself first and go to the first part of the talk.
Okay, no worries.
And I will share again.
And when I see it sharing, I'll let you know.
All right. Thanks, Bill. That was a great introduction. And I'm one of those folks who, let me share the presentation, who just recently joined the UG2 group. So helping the stats there. So as Bill said, my name is Maggie Xenopoulos, and I'm at Trent University. I'm a Canada Research Chair there, and I'm also involved with with RAON, which is the Real-Time Aquatic Ecosystem Observation Network, which is a network that was funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation in 2017, and is where I have access to 4 gliders, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I should, full disclosure, I should mention I'm really excited to join this group and to learn more. I'm not an operator. I'm not a pilot. I'm very interested in the output of gliders and analyzing the data and using them to better improve our understanding of aquatic ecosystems. And this is a little bit what I'll be talking about today. And so, of course, I'll have to start right away with the acknowledgements, because everyone in this group knows that having, operating, and using the data from gliders is not insignificant. And so I have a long list of funders and folks that I need to acknowledge. Too long of a list to put here, but here are some of the funding agencies that have supported the missions over the years, and some of the data that I will be presenting today. And much of the data and the slides that I'll be presenting today were put together on the bottom corner there by my postdoc, Nolan Pierce. All right, so here's some history. Bill talked about the Great Lakes, some history of the gliders, and I'm talking about the Slocum, the Webb Teledyne gliders here. There may be other gliders in the Great Lakes, but these are the ones I will be talking about today. So a little bit of history on the gliders in the Great Lakes. You can see that they haven't been used as much. They haven't been used as much as they have been in the ocean. And
Hi,
something else.
Maggie. Sorry to interrupt you. We're not seeing the full presentation or the slides advancing. I wonder if it toggled to another screen for you.
Oh, okay. Well, it says I'm still sharing. Do you see that I left my presentation?
We can see the PowerPoint program and the first slide, but not the full presentation screen.
Okay, now I stop sharing. Okay. Yes?
It is still just the PowerPoint program.
How's this?
Are you in presentation mode or?
I am in presentation mode, yes.
Huh.
Okay, let me try. Oops. Let me try one more thing. It worked the other day when we tried it.
It did.
Okay, so now I'm in presentation mode, yes?
I'm still only seeing the program. Are you sharing your full screen or just the application? That might make a difference.
I am sharing the full screen.
Sorry about this all.
So I think this is Jennifer Bowers. I think one thing you can do with this is just share your PowerPoint window and then advance slides by hitting each one in that left-hand panel. It's just a workaround we found with GoToMeeting sometimes.
So sorry, run this by me again.
So if you open your PowerPoint back up and share your screen.
Yeah. Share them in this mode?
Yes. Now on the left panel, don't hit present, just leave it like that. You can just click through each one of those and we should be able to see most of it.
So that works.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll minimize that.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it works.
Okay.
Sorry
Thanks,
about
Jen.
that, Maggie.
Oh, this is bad. Okay, well, I can hide this ribbon too. How's that? Okay, better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is what you missed. So those are my acknowledgements there. And I got interrupted when I was showing you. Oops, you can see me moving now, yes? So showing you a little bit of history of the gliders in the Great Lakes. And let me collect my thoughts here. Oh, so this is where I was at. So you can see that there's a little bit of Great Lakes influence in the names of the gliders. And today I am actually speaking to you from Peterborough, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. But the Great Lakes are part of the Williams Treaty, but the Great Lakes are part of there's a lot of tribes and First Nations that are part of the Great Lakes, including the Ojibwe or the Chippewa, the Fox, the Huron, the Iroquois, the Ottawa, and the Sioux. And this is a bit reflected in the glider names through history. And so the first glider in the Great Lakes was acquired not too long ago and was named by J. Austin at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and was named Gitchagami, which is actually the Ojibwe word for Lake Superior. And autonomous underwater vehicles have been used by many of you in the marine environments to collect high-resolution ocean data across large spatial and temporal scales. But as you can see, it is only more recently, in the past 10 years, that these technologies have been leveraged to better understand the ecology and biogeochemistry of large lake ecosystems, and even very, very recently for smaller lakes. So similar to this group, we quickly realized that we needed a kind of a network approach to work on the gliders, to cooperate and to help each other out. And so through a multi-institutional collaboration, this is how the Consortium of Great Lake Gliders came to be. And it has kind of directed both research and development and observational glider missions in the Great Lakes. I should mention that the consortium is very informal still. We're not an organized group necessarily, but it is still there to provide a framework for collaborative glider operations, including sharing knowledge, goal setting and mission planning, data processing and analysis, which is what I'm interested in, training and deployment and recovery of equipment, and also, sharing piloting. And so there's that first glider. Gitchagami, unfortunately, was lost in 2018. It is somewhere in the bottom of Lake Superior, and hopefully it's not setting the stage for the rest of them to be lost at some point, the ones that were acquired after that. The next glider was acquired by the University of Michigan there, SIGLR, the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research, GLOS 236, and then after that came Nokomis, which is the Ojibwe word for grandmother. The Nokomis has actually completed missions in all 5 of the Great Lakes, and that one is operated by the Great Lakes Lab in Duluth, the US EPA Great Lakes Lab in Duluth. Then after that, Rayon, so I'm part of Rayon. Rayon acquired 4 gliders through funding from Canada's Foundation for Innovation. So we have the Mary Lou, Daphnia, Cormorant, and Sturgeon. So this started the G3 technology gliders. And 2 of these, and I don't know which ones, but 2 of these are actually for operations in shallow waters. Followed by Gavia, which is a genus word for common loon. The Josephine, which is actually owned by the Great Lakes Observing System and managed by SIGLR. And Josephine is for Josephine Mandamin, which is an Anishinaabe First Nations founding member of a water protections movement in the Great Lakes. And I guess Jay couldn't leave the glider, and so he got Hmong, which is Ojibwe for common loon, very, very recently. So all of these missions, all of these gliders get a lot of support from GLOS, the Great Lakes Observing System. And what else should I say about this? Again, yeah, so we're a pretty informal group. The group does need a champion. In the more recent years, it was championed actually by Rayon's pilot, Kaylin Burmaster. And so we hope to be able to continue supporting each other in that way, because we kind of need it. And my next slide, I can click on it here. Hopefully I'm still scrolling. This actually shows a map of most of the flight paths and missions over the years in the Great Lakes. It is not the most up-to-date map, But you can see lots of missions in Lake Superior, probably reflected from the US EPA lab and Jay's gliders at the University of Minnesota Duluth, in Lake Michigan as well, some in Lake Huron and Lake Ontario, a little bit less in Lake Erie. So the western basin of Lake Erie, this is the basin that gets those harmful algal blooms, but it's very shallow waters. So the deepest point is maybe 9 meters or 10 meters or so, and so it's up until recently it has been really kind of hard to operate gliders there. But with the new shallow water gliders, it'll be a little bit easier to also collect data from there. And so see that these are some of the measurements that have been collected over the years through the consortium, to understand better hypoxia, temperature, chlorophyll, deep water dynamics. I'm not a fisheries person, but also fisheries applications. I'm actually most interested in ecosystem processes, so primary production, respiration, carbon balances, and gliders are therefore play a big role in our understanding of large lake ecosystems, as they allow the collection of a lot of data, high resolution, continuous, real time, over large spatial and temporal scales, which is nearly impossible to accomplish with traditional scientific cruises for a lake that's this big. I know I'm not seeing, but I can see that there may be some eye rolls because in the oceans, that this happens, but in the Great Lakes, this is something that we struggle with. And so we are still faced, and buoys. There's a lot of buoys in the Great Lakes, but of course they get you the data from the one location, and we are still faced with a large challenge associated with glider data, and that is separating the spatial and temporal dynamic variables like ecosystem metabolism. So what I'm going to talk about for the next, the remaining minutes are 2 missions and 2 results from last year. Missions. The first one is the use of glider to estimate primary production in the Great Lakes with a focus on Lake Superior. And then the second one is some results from an anoxia, hypoxia, and turnover mission in the central basin of Lake Erie. Okay, so I'll start with the primary production, and there's a list of authors. Of course, I did not do this by myself. And again, these are some of the results that Nolan Pierce put together that I'm presenting to you today. So a little bit of acronym there for you for the Great Lakes. Apparently the Great Lakes, or Lake Superior, has a Twitter handle, and she likes to be known as the GLOAT, for the greatest lake of all time. And Lake Superior may be the GLOAT, but it has very few measurements of primary production with it. It has just not been sampled as much as other aquatic ecosystems in the world. There's some satellite estimates, and there's some range rates that I have put on the slide. In fact, in terms of in situ measurements of primary production, the only measurements that I have found in the literature are those of Bob Sterner. It's a paper published in 2010 in the Journal of Great Lakes Research. And the other thing that we can glean from primary production is from paleo work. So proxies from sediments are telling us possibly that rates of primary production in Lake Superior are increasing, possibly due to human influence around the catchment. And so we really need to kind of have measurements of primary production, and gliders may be a way to do that. So how does one study primary production in Lake Superior? This is really hard for us freshwater folks. There's a spatial component, there's the vertical and horizontal component, there's a seasonal issue, the ice cover, ice-free season, and getting out on this large lake is hard. Again, please do not chuckle for those of you with big sea-going vessels. And the biogeochemistry of the Great Lakes in general is very variable. This is a slide showing total phosphorus, and it ranges 500-fold across the catchment. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I'm here to tell you that we need to capitalize on gliders to better measure primary production. And so here we took advantage of something called the Cooperative Science Monitoring Initiative, or CSMI. This is another coordinated cooperation kind of movement across the Great Lakes catchment where everyone gets together and samples one of the Great Lakes every 5 years. So every 5 years, the Great Lakes rotate. And 2021 was the CSMI year for Lake Superior. So this was a great way for the consortium to get together and coordinate missions. So we took advantage of the CSMI to deploy 4 gliders simultaneously in Lake Superior for roughly 3 or 4 week missions in August and September. And within each deployment, continuous temperature, chlorophyll, and dissolved oxygen measurements were used to estimate daily rates of primary production and respiration, and ultimately ecosystem metabolism. Okay. Here's just a map to kind of orient you. And through a few consortium emails, again, we're a pretty informal group. Flight paths were designed to capture spatial variation in deep and shallow areas of Lake Superior and in nearshore and offshore areas. So those are the maps there of the areas. Duluth was the shallowest of the areas, and number 3, Silver Bay, was the deepest mission. The glider went the deepest in that one. And so I should also mention missions did not perfectly overlap because we're only human, but roughly each glider was deployed between early August and mid-September. All right, so here's the data calculations. For today, we were primarily interested in the epilimnion measurements. So these are the measurements displayed by the yellow dots, or the surface where the water mixes with the surface waters of lakes, where it mixes with the atmosphere. So what we did is we extracted the time series and dissolved oxygen, temperature, and other variables as displayed by the figure on the right, and assigned them to the diurnal, nighttime, or daytime boxes. We didn't completely invent calculations here. We used the methods already established by Barone et al. You see the paper here published in LNO Methods. And this was for ocean primary production using underwater vehicles. And so we use this method to isolate fluxes associated with photosynthesis or gross primary production GPP and respiration or ER. While also accounting for oxygen fluxes from the atmosphere and lake mixing. And so we did this at a daily scale, and I'm going to present mean and median results today. Before I show you results, I should mention quickly that we did use preliminary data from the Lake Ontario EPA glider mission, which was another CSMI, so the coordinated effort with many partners. This was from the Nokomis, so the EPA glider, but there was a lot of folks involved in the collection of this data. We used this data to verify that our method would work because Lake Ontario actually has more on-the-ground primary production measurements than Lake Superior does. And Barone et al. Did that with their previous paper as well. And what we did here is we compared our mean gross primary production, the top box here, and ecosystem respiration, the bottom box here. So we compared our data, which is denoted by the box plot, with the data collected with more traditional methods, which are the triangles here, the circles, and the square. So these are more traditional measures to measure primary productions, which include from temperature and DO strings and from carbon-14 incubations. And so you can see that the glider data matches the more traditional measurements. And so we were confident that our calculations would work. Okay, before I show you primary productions, here's some DO measurements that were for each of the sites there. Remember Silver Bay is the deep site. Duluth is the site that's more shallow or more near shore. And so the first thing we did was to summarize the dissolved oxygen data from the 4 sites and 4 missions. And DO has been used in the past to generate to get a general idea of metabolism. So metabolism, which includes the respiration and the primary production in Lake Superior. And so here we have the max in the dark blue box and the minimum oxygen in the light blue boxes, and how they varied in the 4 missions at the 4 sites. And And just to say for now, I mean, there's a lot that we can do with this data, but just to say for now that our numbers were consistent with those reported by others. Dissolved oxygen is a measurement that's a little more available in Lake Superior compared to primary production. Okay, there's the primary production data and the ecosystem respiration data. So the primary production are the green boxes, the box plots, and the ecosystem respiration data are the blue boxes. When we pair gross primary production and ecosystem, before I pair them, so these are just standard box plots on the left of GPP, as I said, in green, and ER in blue, and on the right here is just the chlorophyll measurements. And so there's not perfect alignment between primary production and chlorophyll, and that's not unusual. We know that happens from other data in the literatures. But you can see that that there are some differences between sites, although not that great in terms of primary production. But the one thing I'm going to mention here is the more near-shore site in Duluth also have the highest rates of primary production. So here's where I'm pairing. So when we pair gross primary production and ecosystem respiration to examine the net ecosystem metabolism to determine whether the lake is net heterotrophic, meaning taking in a sink of carbon, or net heterotrophic, meaning releasing carbon to the atmosphere, this is what we get. So if the median here is above 0, we have a system that is net heterotrophic, and below 0 is a system that is net heterotrophic. And so the lake in general, Lake Superior, is net autotrophic. There are periods when the lake is net heterotrophic, meaning is a source of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, but for the most part, we do not detect a significant difference between sites. And except for the Duluth site, so the nearshore site, which is on average net heterotrophic, so pumping out carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the other thing we wanted to do is we converted our data into aerial rates. This is the box here on my right, at least, to compare with those earlier measurements I told you. So the Sterner measurements, which are the only in situ measurements of primary production in Lake Superior. For this study, it did not match as well as it did for the Lake Ontario study. So the glider data appears to be measuring higher rates of primary production compared to the earlier data, and this could be because they are indeed increasing, but because the glider seemed to be promising to measure these rates, we should definitely continue to do that to see if they are indeed increasing across the lake. So I'm going to skip ahead now. I'm going pretty quickly, but I'm going to skip ahead to talk about the Lake Erie mission. Okay, so Lake Erie, just to locate you again, it's the shallower of the 5 Great Lakes. And here is the lake. Typically, when studied, is divided in 3 basins. The western basin is the shallower of the basins. This is the basin that experiences harmful algal blooms every year. And then the central basin has problems as well. It experiences anoxia or hypoxia every year. And this lake has an important fisheries in it. So this is an area that's an active research area for the lake to understand the dynamics, the oxygen dynamics in the lakes, how they change and the drivers and what triggers them. And so here's a mission that had a lot of goals, but we're focusing just on the turnover for this presentation. Had a lot and using as much of the data as we can. What else can I say about this? So again, the hypolimnion, or the bottom waters of this central basin, goes anoxic during the summer. And we are hoping that the high spatial and temporal information that's gleaned from gliders will help us better understand the changes that occur surrounding this large turnover event in the fall, when the water column mixes again. And so to do this, we deployed the glider from mid-September to mid-October of 2021 and set it on a flight path here in the red box of repeated near-shore, offshore transects just east of Cleveland, Ohio. So the glider moved back and forth within this red box over here. Okay, lots to see in the slide. So the data sets that we get, of course, from these gliders are very large, and this is one of those data sets where my PDF, Nolan Pierce and I decided to try and putting the data into Excel just for the let's of it. And this just serves as a reminder for me to tell you that we do not use Excel for the analysis. We use R. R is what we use. We can use what's the other one we use for the DOM data? MATLAB as well, but Nolan is more familiar with R. So Nolan, who did most of the analysis on this data, was using R to process the data. But because the data sets are so large, glider data through the Great Lakes Consortium has been mainly used for observational purposes so far. And this data analysis area is an area where we still need to grow, and certainly where I feel we still need to cooperate, perhaps even with this group. And so what I can show you from this figure here, from this is what some of the observational data might look like, and you're all probably familiar with this. So this is temperature data from the glider mission over time, where time is also equal to the total distance traveled. And so here's the temperature data, and you can see there's a break in the stratification just prior to September 25, this first line here. But how do we compare this observational data surrounding turnover and move it towards a more targeted assessment of the spatially explicit changes occurring in the lake? So this is what we thought about for a little while. And one of the ways that we decided to do this is to bin the data by common spatial location. The location being quote unquote near shore to offshore transect, and then to summarize the data over a specified time period. And so in this case, we chose before turnover when the lake was stratified. You can see the bottom waters that are colder, the top waters that are warmer, the first turnover period and the second turnover period. And what else can I tell you about this? So yeah, so we mix the data, summarize this data within the before turnover and after turnover time periods. And then what we are left with is a grid of depth by the common offshore distance, where each cell is representative of the average condition that's being measured, whether it's dissolved oxygen or temperature or conductivity or salinity over the specified time period. So that's how we did it. And so here's the same data, but binned. Okay, so this data is summarized by offshore distance. So offshore distance here on the x-axis, and this two plots here, the before turnover period, the one that I'm circling with my browser, and 1 week after turnover period. So you can see the homogenization of the temperature. So the lake is mixing again. Here the lake is colder. Okay, so we can see this clear stratification on the first plot and the mixing on the second plot, 2 layers of water. But with this common scale, we can now overlay these 2 plots and use matrix algebra to generate statistical tests or inference on the spatially explicit change in this case temperature, but in other limnological variables as a result of this event. And so we could talk about oxygen. I know the mission was meant to study mostly hypoxia, but what I'm presenting here is backscatter. So to illustrate how we analyze the data, I didn't use oxygen. It looks pretty much like the temperature data, but we used backscatter because backscatter was a little more interesting to us to better explain the spatial differences and temporal differences in the lake. So backscatter is a nice variable which includes, at least for lakes, particulate materials in the water column. It can include sediments, algae, and organic matter. And we can see that before before turnover, the water column was fairly homogeneous, with low backscatter in the surface water or the epilimnion, and a greater amount of backscatter in the hypolimnion, so that's the bottom waters here. And then there was but following turnover, there was a very dramatic change, as you can see from the second plot. It appears that following the turnover, there was some sort of turbulent mixing or resuspension event, for lack of a better term, which churned up a lot of material, resulting in this large increase in backscatter signal in the more nearshore region of our transect. And while this is really interesting from an observational perspective, using the overlay approaches that I outlined earlier, we can now begin to identify spatial explicit changes in backscatter and the magnitude of those changes throughout the lake. Okay, so this is where hopefully we can start using stats. And so using these overlay techniques where we're comparing the first period versus the other period, so this is the plot here, we can look at the absolute difference in backscatter between these two different time points. And you can see again this big increase in the nearshore area with a much smaller increase and even a decrease in the offshore and hypolimnion as we progress through from nearshore to offshore. The next plot here, okay, so there's a nice variability here, but is this significant? So using the matrix algebra, we can actually calculate test statistics and p-values to show where these differences were significant in their direction of change. So based on this plot here, you can see there was indeed a significant increase in backscatter, so that's the red, throughout the water column, apart from this little part here offshore and in the hypolimnion, whereas either not non-significant or a significant decrease. So what this is comparing the pre-turnover period versus the first turnover period. The next slide actually compares the first turnover period versus the second turnover period. So there's a little more exciting stuff that we can glean from this comparison. So again, using the same method as before, comparing turnover period 1 versus turnover period 2, we can see the spatially explicit differences in backscatter, where there was a significant decrease in the nearshore area and increase in the offshore area, both in absolute values as well as statistically. So the fall turnover event in the central basin of Lake Erie resulted in some sort of suspension that originated in the near shore and then moved outwards and became more diluted throughout the water column. So that's what we can conclude with this data. So just a few more conclusions here. Oh, before I give you some conclusions, there's a lot, now that we have it binned and we have it in this matrix, there's a lot that we can do statistically with this data. And so Nolan went a little bit nuts there and he said, well, what happens if I do other statistics? Because p-values are somewhat binary and not every statistician likes them. So we can also calculate effect sizes and other methods of statistics. And what he did here is, in this example here, he used Cohen's D, which is an appropriate effect size measurement, so an indication of variability for the comparison between the two means or the two periods. So some conclusions here. Ultimately, so backscatter is interesting. The other limnological variables behaved as expected around the turnover, so as expected, known from limnological literature, where this event caused the vertical and horizontal homogenization of the previously stratified variables such as dissolved oxygen, salinity, and conductivity. And while we show one way to move from observational data collection to more targeted assessments, our work, I think, here is not without some challenges. First and foremost, how do we accurately define the variability in the system, given the repeated measurements being collected for each depth and distance pairing? There's also a space and time interaction that has to be acknowledged, given the time it takes for the glider to move to different locations within the lake. But nevertheless, I'm excited by this result, and we can start addressing these issues. If we can start better addressing these issues, we can better design glider missions to better meet our statistical needs. For estimations of, for me, what's interesting ecosystem processes, and ultimately to generate a greater return on investment from the observational data that's being collected. So just thinking about gliders as a way to inform lakes, large lake carbons, which is what I'm interested in, large lake carbon budgets. They look to be promising, at least to estimate primary production spatially and temporally, and for water column integrated measurements. These are some other things, so much potential for the Great Lakes have a lot of issues. There's a picture of the western basin of Lake Erie with its algal bloom. Can we use them as early warning indicators? So these are areas that need some work, or that show potential. I'm not a fish person. I know some of the rayon gliders are outfitted with mechanisms to better detect fish, like eco-sounders or other modems which talk to fish which are tagged. And so the Great Lakes have an important fishery. It's really economically important, and so the use of these gliders in the Great Lakes for fish, of course, has a lot of potential here. And with that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm going to leave you with a picture here of sunset over Lake Erie.
Thank you, Maggie. Really appreciate that. Questions, please. Either shout out or type something into your into the chat session, please. Maggie, how long typically are your missions that you try to achieve to catch these events?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I probably couldn't tell you. For these missions here, so the Lake Superior ones were 3 to 4 weeks. One of them was maybe a little bit shorter. The Lake Erie one. So these are, I think, to get to your question, these are shorter than what you see going on in the oceans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're not many months at a time, but they would be maybe weeks at a time.
So you're targeting the events as they occur, and then okay, yeah.
They can be, yeah.
Any other questions? And certainly you can get in touch with Maggie as well for any follow-on questions. That was super, and I really standing up the consortium there. I know it's early, but to show that level of collaboration across the Great Lakes, that's awesome as well as the science that's being done. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for letting me share.
Okay, we'll move on to the next presentation for this afternoon, and this is OceanGNS, which is a platform for glider mission and planning and coordination. So Nicolai, this will be presented by Nicolai von Oppeln-Bronikowski, and Nicolai's background is a mix of oceanography and mechanical engineering. He's the glider operations manager at Memorial University of Newfoundland, where they operate and use a fleet of 8 Slocum gliders since 2006 and continue to develop new projects with interesting application using this technology. He's also co-founder and CEO of Ocean Glider Navigation System, which is OceanGNS, which is a cloud-based tool to improve the whole experience of operating and collecting data with ocean gliders, which he will present today through some use cases. So Nicolai, I turn it over to you, please.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I'm gonna try and get this to work. Let me know if everybody sees my
so far
presentation.
So good. Yeah, so far so good.
So yep. Good. Okay. All right. Yeah. So thanks so much for introducing me, Bill. And I'm gonna talk about something a bit different than some of the previous discussions in this forum. So this will be mostly about a tool to improve, as Bill mentioned, how glider missions are done. So I'm wearing 2 hats. So one hat is OceanGNS, which is what I'll be talking about today. The other hat, as Bill mentioned, is we have a fleet of gliders here. We actually have 9 gliders. There's a few in the background here. because I had a bit of a tour a couple days ago from visitors from the UK. So my office is pretty full, and I don't ever forget that we have lots of missions and gliders to fly around. But yeah, so OceanGNS is something that was actually started by flying gliders here in Newfoundland, because we have a few missions. We've been flying quite a few missions now in the Labrador Sea with collaborators from the UK and from the US. And one of the key challenges is how do you coordinate a mission that is out, in a remote region with different scientists with different science needs. Somebody looking at chlorophyll, somebody looking at mixing in a deep convection zone, and people paying attention to different kinds of science goals, and how do you make the technology easier to adapt for people who are not in the gliderverse necessarily but care about the data. And then on a pragmatic note, when you are in a region like the Labrador Sea, which is quite a harsh region, I'm happy to talk about that as well, because we have quite a few interesting experiences that are interesting to people who manufacture equipment. My litmus test is that if it survives the Labrador Sea, it'll survive anywhere. So anyway, we can talk about that at some other point. But yeah, so if you want to get from the Labrador Sea back home, how do you do that if you can't send a vessel there? So that was one of the other criteria for pushing OceanGNS. And OceanGNS has been something that's been talked about in many different ways by different groups, not necessarily by that name, but by those ideas that it represents. So some of the things I'll be talking about today is what is OceanGNS, talk a little bit about what it can do, the different components of it, and then some case studies with actual gliders in the water users around the world. And so the key kind of reasons for why you want OceanGNS is because you want to further the access to information. So allow a place for pilots and non-technical personnel to talk to each other. By non-technical, I just mean anybody, not necessarily scientists, but just people that don't pilot the vehicle. And a place to share essential information about the mission, but also tertiary information, so information that's about the environment, what you actually want to sample, as opposed to what you're currently sampling, so adjusting the mission, all that's a lot of information. Then the actual planning portion of it, so how do you get to where you want to go, and coordinating between different platforms. So, most of us here know probably about slocum gliders or sea gliders. Those are different platforms. How do you get them in the same place? There's also other platforms out there, wave gliders, sail drones, so sail buoys. So all these autonomous vehicles, ideally, should be able to coordinate the actual mission. And then the last aspect is the sharing of knowledge. So if you have a platform where all this information is ingested and made available to the stakeholders, to the users, you should also have a way of sharing that, more broadly. So that's another kind of key element. So we all have websites. I think all the glider operators out there, groups, they have websites. A lot of them have maps for showing at least their glider tracks, right? So that's all part of that as well. So, this is, I think, probably a schematic that rings a bell with, at least 5 years ago with a lot of glider pilots, right? You will have a program to pilot the vehicle. You'll have a way to get your, you'll go on marinetraffic.com or something like that. You go get your current models, your netcdf files or something like that, process them with Python or MATLAB or R, overlay all that stuff in some sort of way, maybe in Google Earth even, and then kind of go back, right? So that's the traditional loop. So, in that space, we wanted to make that a bit easier and compress it all into one place. So that's OceanGNS. So when you log into the portal, what you see is basically everything you need, or we hope everything you need in one place to be a mission planner tool. And I'm going to point out OceanGNS is not a replacement for the execution level. So the execution level is when you enter commands to tell the glider to read a particular mission or update its waypoints. That's the execution level. That's where the SFMC sits. That's where groups have built their own interfaces at some times as well. And that's where pilots kind of come in and communicate with the vehicle. That's something we don't want to mess around with. That's something that's established, and people have their ways of controlling the vehicle, but this is the layer above that. So that's what OceanGNS is. It's a mission planning layer that sits on top and ingests data. So you have your missions on the left side. You log in, you have your missions on the left side, you have your data layers on the right side, and so you see everything in one place. And when you kind of keep going, you have different tools you can use. You can pull down a layer. This is surface heat fluxes from HICOM. You know, we can add any layer that is available that's, you know, that we can get a link to. We can add that information, you know, fairly quickly. We have the capacity to do that and provide it to either the particular user group that wants it or all users. Can be custom layers as well, and then you can plot data, you can investigate the data. So it's basically, on the one hand, a fancy DigitalOcean browser. So you can have all your data sets you'd possibly want in your mission, for your mission, ready at a click of a button. And then the other component of this is Ocean Planner. So Ocean Planner is your gateway to navigating your vehicle. So you have current models, and how do you take that information about the currents and turn it into useful information for how to navigate your vehicle. You can do that by eye, by looking at the vectors or experience in a particular area, or you can use OceanGNS, change some settings like using bathymetry, using different current models. You can do different runs. You can compare those runs against each other and, you know, look at which ones align or where you have consistency, and then download that file and send it to a Slocum glider or Sea glider. We'll add multiple formats to this as well. So once we have a way to do this for Sea Explorers, which is the French company, we can do that as well. At the moment, that's not there yet, but it's there for Slocum and Sea Glider. And then you just take that file that you download and you put it in your piloting tool and send it to the glider, and you're done. And if you do that repeatedly, we found doing that with gliders that we had in the water from field trials is that you increase the speed of the glider towards the target on average by about 15%. So there's a real saving there in terms of efficiency for how your glider navigates. So it's something that's certainly worthwhile when you're trying to come home from a study area back to, say, Rhode Island, or if you're trying to navigate in strong currents. So it's definitely an advisable tool to have access to. The other component of Mission Planner is logs. So we're all familiar with trying to keep track of who's doing what or what's been observed when. Mission Planner allows you also to draw any kind of shape pretty much in the water, in the ocean. For example, a sampling box that you want pilots to pay attention to, or a feature like an eddy if you saw that in SST data and you wanted to, you know, keep track of that, maybe through multiple time steps or something like that. You can drop pins there, take a little note, and then you have that metadata record available. You can download the whole thing after the mission is done. So you have a centralized, easy access way to keep track of that information and export it in a format that's important to you or relevant to you. And so here I'm just kind of keeping track of that. I'm going a little bit faster because I want to kind of get through this product presentation portion of the slides and then talk more about the case studies and questions that people might have. And this is user B. So the other thing is that if users share a mission, so for example, a group in the US and a group in the UK or a group in Canada. So for example, user A is the US and user B is Canada. These two groups that are part of the same project or mission share logs and share the mission. And so therefore it really allows for that coordinated approach, right? So you can actually see what the other group is doing and interact with them in a direct forward way rather than trying to email each other. OPAS is another cool, exciting thing we're working on. That's under development, so that's not out yet for all users, but it's in beta mode for testing at the moment. And basically, this is an in situ simulator. So rather than simulating your gliders in Python or MATLAB code on your computer or running it in simul.sim on the Slocum gliders, which if you do, for example, a 2-hour dive, it's going to take 2 hours to complete that calculation. You can do that here in the same environment by just clicking some points or putting some waypoints in, and then you have controls for your ballast pump, for your pitch and your climb depths and all that stuff that you would also set in your mission file, and you'll get real results in terms of how your glider would navigate given the density gradient from the models, and how fast it would move in the water. So you can start simulating behavior ahead of time, and I think this is another interesting development to add to that navigation aspect, because it also allows this is kind of pretty early stuff we're showing, but we're hoping to also make it so that it's more friendly towards people that are not familiar, for example, with what I don't know, a pump limit is or minimum speed for your dive and climb. So yeah, it's just some cool stuff on the horizon. Then there's the Ocean Explorer component, so that's the digital ocean. So I'm going to dive a bit more into that. So we have been adding consistently quite a few different data sets. And that's because we have lots of users around, so they want to see new things or they have certain requests, so we bring stuff in. So this is, for example, 4 different SST data sets. HICOM is a model. There's the JPL MER SST data set, which is daily. There's Coral Temp from NOAA, which is also daily. Then we have the GEO-16 satellite, which gives you hourly data, which is high res, but when there's cloud cover, obviously you're not gonna get SST data. So here I'm just kind of comparing those for the same date. And so users can do that in our platform very easily. They can pick layers, look at them, click through them, and see how consistent they are. And if you're trying to track, say, a warm core ring off the east coast of the US to do a study on such a feature, then that's this is a way to do it, right? You have access to it. You can put logs in, you can put waypoints in, you can try and navigate your vehicle to it. And or I'm thinking for hurricanes or storms, if you know the location of them from different data sets and satellite observations and models, you can intercompare those and deliver better science. So that's just one application of Ocean Explorer, is the comparison of different data sets. Adjusting color to identify features. So we've been working very hard to make OceanGNS as user-friendly as possible and as versatile as possible. So this is, when you click on the adjust color bar button, it basically, there's an auto range feature. So if your window is zoomed in, this is Baja California, then it will pick the minimum and maximum range of temperatures. Here's temperature, it could be salinity, it could be whatever layer you choose, and it'll scale to that range that's actually in the window. So very quickly you can see what are the gradients, where are the fronts, things like that. So again, another helpful way to pinpoint data, find things that you're actually interested in, and kind of dissect what you can get. You can overlay different information as well. So here we have altimetry tracks from JSON, GEO-16 data in the background, SST data in the background, and so you can try and find, overlay, for example, altimetry, and try and see if you can find in the along track data the same signatures you're seeing in SST. So that's, again, quite useful if you're trying to, go hunting for eddies or something like that. So this is the part I wanted to kind of talk a bit more about. So case studies. So we're very fortunate, and I know Adam Comeau from Sea Otter is on the, or was at least, in this webinar as well. So he can also certainly answer questions about his group. But we're very fortunate to have been working with Dalhousie Sea Otter glider team for a long time now, and also in terms of OceanGNS, and they've been happy to use OceanGNS for a while. And so this is a snapshot of the missions that are currently in the water for them. And they gave us permission to kind of show this, so it's all cool. But yeah, so basically just to show that there's different vehicles in the water. There's a wave glider that's just off the Grand Banks right now. They're using OceanGNS to figure out the best ways to do the monitoring with that vehicle. They have gliders that are monitoring together in the Cabot Strait, which is part of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They have another glider on the shelf. And so OceanGNS is being used here to, make these vehicles work together and also share that information with the stakeholders for these projects. So Sea Otter flies gliders for different projects, for different users, for different user groups of this data. And so they're using OceanGNS to then also share that information with them. So we're very happy that that's happening. And just to show, we've done lots of missions by now, and we've had lots of feedback coming in through that. So that's also really cool for us to see that our platform is being used consistently by a group for their missions. Another one that's happening in the US right now is a sea glider deployed by Allison Gray and Jamie Palter from the University of Rhode Island and Washington. And so we've been adding new features to OceanGNS to help them, make their mission the best it can be. So they've been using the Norwegian glider team for the piloting of the glider. And then OceanGNS has been kind of the overall platform that brings all the different people together and the different data streams and can act as a planning tool so that Jamie or whoever is in charge of setting the course for the glider can write a quick message in the logs or look at the data from the glider and decide how to adjust the mission, and then send that information back so that the group in Norway can adjust the piloting for the glider. So this is a really kind of global case of collaboration, which is really cool. And I don't know how many people have experience with having literally an ocean between where the pilots are and where the users of the data are. So this is really quite cool, especially because this isn't a case where the users are just receiving the data. The users have a real input to a team that sits, in another country to pilot this vehicle. So this is quite exciting to see happening in real time. So yeah, and just to show too that you can overlay different profiles from the vehicle and compare them, because knowing how things have changed is a big part of actively flying a vehicle in the ocean. So I think I just kind of went quickly through the talk, but I'm actually quite okay with that because I'm kind of hoping that this opens it up to just have people say things they want to say or ask questions. And yeah, but just to kind of have a summary. So I'm hoping that at this point I've convinced that OceanGNS is a good thing to support the global glider community with their operations. I think there's some really unique tools in there and powerful tools to improve how missions are done. And I think that, by having continuous development and improvement happening by a dedicated team that supports a tool, you're ending up with a better product for the whole community rather than splitting it up and everybody doing kind of similar things. So with that, I'll close and open it up to whoever wants to chime in.
Thank you so much. That was great and really thorough. Hank, I see you have turned your video on and unmuted, so I'll let you go ahead and ask the first question.
Thank you, Nico. Great presentation, and thanks a lot for spending some time to share OceanGNS with us. Well, because you brought it up, I'm going to ask the question. Your OPAS functionality, where you can change things like minimum speed through water and your buoyancy pump throw, does that, are you able to use a flight model to then translate sort of those settings to how that might affect horizontal speed through over ground and also your battery consumption at after making those changes?
I heard your question. My screen just froze, so I don't know what happened. I don't know what you're seeing on your end, but
Just you. Just you.
okay, perfect. I can deal with this later. So yeah, we're using a flight. We're not using a flight model like something that, for example, Lucas Merkelbach published. But we are instead trying to simplify it so that the calculations happen quickly, right? So when you're in the environment and you click some buttons to go from A to B, or you have a set of waypoints you want to investigate through a set of current steps or models and forecast steps or so on and densities and stuff like that, that it happens quickly. So we're simplifying some things, but we're trying. So this is the part where we're in right now, where we're trying to investigate how accurate this is and, you know, kind of do some simulations internally before we just kind of release it and say, yeah, this works. Yeah. And sorry, did you have a second question? Because I was trying to fiddle around with the GoToMeeting, I think, maybe.
Oh, I think it just really how those, not just those settings, how they transfer to horizontal speed over ground, but also how they might affect your battery overall power consumption.
Right. Yeah. So that should be doable, but I think at the moment that's not something we've implemented. But we can certainly, we have the information in terms of the current draw from different pumps and different dive depths. And so that should be quite easy to implement, because that's what we've done for the Ocean Planner for the navigation components. So the way that the glider navigation algorithm works is it actually tries to minimize a cost function, and part of the input to the cost function is your current draw when you dive at shallower depths. That's how bathymetry works, right? So if you have a deep glider with a 1,000-meter pump, it's definitely going to be more efficient when you're diving deeper. So if you can find a path that both minimizes currents but also minimizes your maximizes your dive depth, that'll be a more efficient path. And if positional restraints or constraints are not the main prerogative. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, I think the answer is yes.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nicolai, I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat with your screen frozen, but we have a question from Philip in the chat. Philip, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or I'm happy to read it out loud?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. There's a couple of questions. How does your platform pull the glider data in to actually display it?
Yeah, so cool. That's a great question. That's definitely been something we've been paying attention to. So we have a data server that users can access. So they get an account and they can stream their data to that server, and then we grab it from our server, and that makes it easy for the user, relatively easy for the user, and easy for us. For larger groups that have an API that sits in between, say their SFMC and or whatever base station, we can work with their API, so we can work with their interface to grab the data. We've also worked with AirDAP, so whatever basically users have, we can pull. But there is a process of us actually engaging with the user unless the user is using our data server. So it's not something where we have a way for you to just kind of drag and drop things into the GUI at the browser level. It requires some contact with us.
Well, that's fine. And just two other quick questions. One is most of your testing been in the North Atlantic? Have you had any testing experience done with things like sea ice, etc.?
Yeah, so that's been, I didn't want to put this full of case studies, but so we've been working with NOC, National Oceanography Center in the UK, and they had a glider in the Labrador Sea, we had a glider in the Labrador Sea, and OceanGNS was kind of key to helping figure out how far the gliders can actually go towards their intended target because of sea ice. So sea ice was used operationally. And so we grab, I think, 4 different models right now. Well, we grabbed satellite and then 3 different models. And they were quite consistent. And one of them is used by Environment Canada to produce the sea ice maps. And so we were mostly relying on that one to figure out how far can we go and adjust, on a day-by-day basis. Yeah.
And then my last quick question, thanks for the answers to the previous 2. Is there any easy way of modifying color maps in OceanGNS? So somebody who is red, green, colorblind, color maps and viewing things is sometimes causes a little bit of a headache. Is there an easy functionality of switching it to a color map that is a little bit more friendly, or is it something you have to do manually currently? Because I noticed that you had sliders and options for your color maps to set, but I didn't know if there was sort of an easy function.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, fair point. And so the range to region feature seems to produce very high contrast and gradients between for the data. And I was hoping that works well, but if somebody ends up using it and tells us that something isn't working out, I mean, that's the entire premise of OceanGNS, is to maintain the product and make it as user-friendly as possible. So we will look for solutions if it's not working. But so far, we haven't heard anything to the contrary. But you can definitely specify your own color maps inside the settings. So you can choose the points at which colors change. So if that's something that a user wants to play around with, they're more than welcome to. And maybe in the future we can provide a way to save those custom settings, because if that particular user wants to save them, then maybe we can find a way to do that. But at the moment, it's not saved.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. Really appreciate those answers.
Great, thank you, Philip and Nicolai. It looks like we have another question from Anthony. Again, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, or I'm happy to read your question aloud.
Can you hear me? There we go.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for that talk. That looks really good, and I'm really interested in that. It sounds like we have to go through your server to have the data, then whatever data we send to it, then displayed. Is there a lag with that when we send the data that we want, whether it's a glider positioning, and then also as well, can we send example like the SBD and TBD files there so that we can then view that data and either overlay it or some sort of like that we can look at it on the map?
Yeah, so the answer is yes and yes and yes. And we can also work directly with the SFMC API. Some users that we work with, they actually just do that. They just give us access to the API and we can grab the data, and there's no real lag. So it can be as real time as users want. We have users that push data to us every hour, and we have users, and most users get their data as soon as the glider basically delivers it via Iridium.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Nicolai and or Maggie? If you want to drop any in the chat or unmute and ask. Just give it one more second. If we're not hearing any, I just wanted to say thank you again to both of our speakers. Those were really great presentations. I do have one more slide to wrap up, and then we can leave you a little early. I know everyone's always crazy busy these days. So thank you again, Nicolai and Maggie, for presenting.
You're welcome.
Great. So just really quickly, the few things we wanted to go over are bi-monthly webinars. The August webinar will be canceled to make room for our September UG2 workshop, but we'll be back in full force after that. Just a reminder for any industry partners who are interested in briefing, please send your topics to info@underwatergliders.org, or for that matter, any other webinar topics or ideas that you may have and want to share. You can send them to that email address or drop them in the UG2 Slack workspace. And then our final reminder is please register for the upcoming glider workshop, and the abstract submissions are due June 30th, so next Thursday. Dropping the website link in there for you again. And I think that's all we have, unless anyone has any final comments or thoughts to share.
Rudy, Bill Lynch again. I was able to log back in.
Oh, great. Thanks, Bill.
No, I just wanted to, again, thank you very much, and thank the speakers, Maggie and Nicolai, and really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you all. We'll conclude for now, but you guys have a great weekend and week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.